So hello everybody, thank you so much for attending today's DDRC panel on the subject of mastering best practice in data management. It's really nice to see a good turnout again, and I hope that there are some really useful insights coming out of the next hour. Just a quick word on format. I'm going to give the briefest possible introduction to the session, and as I say, set the context. Everybody's on mute by default, but please do use the chat to drop in any questions you may have. And I'm hoping we'll have time for some Q&A at the end, which I'll do my best to marshal. Because this is an open invite event, you might want to withhold any sensitive content that may be relevant but not appropriate to share. And I should also say that the session will be recorded and posted on our community hub. So if we can kick that off, Jay, that'd be great. Thank you. So for those who don't know, the Defence Data Research Centre is a component of the government's Defence AI strategy and the fairly newly formed Defence AI Centre, and it's also an academic partner of DSTL. Now, because we outlined the Centre's mission during last month's event, I'm not actually going to recap in any great detail here, but please do reach out to us if you'd like to hear more about our research and how we might work with you, and you can do that in this chat or find out from the website. We're going to, so this is a sort of takeaway from this. We're going to follow up the session with notes circulated to all, covering what has been discussed today and how the DDRC helps defence organisations in the UK and increasingly around the world. And also point you to some of the useful guidance sources that already exist regarding data management good practice. Alongside that, we're actually working with DSTL at the moment on creating a best practice handbook titled to be decided for data management in defence, and we'll share that as soon as it's ready and we have the go-ahead from DSTL. So the backdrop here is that UK defence is investing heavily in improving how data is managed, shared and improved, and we now have a maturing but signed off data strategy for defence and a defence AI strategy, and I can share the links to these documents in the notes. But despite the ambitious strategic initiatives at the top, typically when DDRC speaks to MOD agencies on the subject of data management best practice, we often hear that various constraints are slowing down progress on the ground. Somebody famous said of war that strategy without tactics is the slowest route to victory. That may well apply to data management as well. So as DDRC is an academic institution at heart, we probably need a hypothesis to set up this debate. I suggest that the hypothesis for today might be that defence needs, one, to work closely with other parts of government that might be further ahead in data management. Two, it needs to partner with industry and academia to assimilate and follow accepted good practice rather than reinvent. And three, it needs to find ways to improve in experimental, incremental ways within those constraints we've just mentioned. In other words, strategy needs to be practicable in every scenario, and each team on the ground needs access to the right guidance and the right tools. So with that in mind, I'm really pleased that we've managed to muster 4 fantastic speakers today to talk us through the challenge. James Herbert is a former Army officer and Cabinet Office data leader, and he's now CEO of a company called Pivotal, which advises defence, justice, health and other departments on improving data management. John Sheridan is Digital Director at the National Archives, and for my money is one of the great thinkers and innovators in data management for government. Veronica Bowman is Principal Statistician at DSTL and is now also advising the DSTL board on improvements in data management for the agency. Finally, George Carter is Data and Analytics Lead at the RAF and is overseeing some really exciting programmes to help the service maintain and extend its defensive advantage for the country. So that's our panel. Welcome. James, if I could start with you. You wrote a really excellent white paper for DDRC describing the size of the challenge, the huge challenge faced by UK defence in terms of technology and data improvement. I'm going to try and find that link and drop it into the chat whilst you speak. Would make some really good half-term reading if you're interested. Could you sum up, James, from your perspective, progress in government data management and what you think the defence agencies might focus on?
Sure, thanks, John. It's a very generous introduction. Thank you. So just thinking about the white paper for a second, what we thought was that UK government has really made huge progress in what's kind of broadly termed digital transformation. across, you know, the entire estate of central government. And given that we've got this huge change coming up for defence, focused primarily around data and AI, as written by a couple of government strategies we'll probably touch on later, we thought, why not try and take the lessons from digital transformation in wider public sector and see what we could use to inform a better and even better implementation of data and AI for defence purposes. Now, that's not to say they're the same thing, and I think there's a slight problem actually in thinking that what is commonly perceived as digital transformation and doing transformation with data are the same thing, because they're not. But some of the broad principles, I think, are similar, and I'll outline some of the ones I pulled out, the themes, if you like, we pulled out in the paper. So first of all, a little bit of context, if that's okay, John. So what drove wanting to do something like this was the idea of increasingly needing to fight war at the pace of software rather than the pace of hardware. And that came around through thinking about an opportunity and a threat, basically. So the opportunity is we've got new platforms, new tools, new ways of working around data, that in the best scenario would help people within a defence context to understand threats, to share information and to take action. And that stuff is much more democratized, more cost effective and more accessible than it's ever been before due to changes in sort of public cloud, generative AI, etc., etc. And that's been reflected at a policy level in the UK with the Defence Digital Strategy in 21 and the Defence AI Strategy in 22. So in terms of the state of the art, which I think you were alluding to, John, it's kind of laid out where we'd like to be, and they're great strategies for anyone that wants to read them. And also, I go on about this book all the time, but it slightly disappoints me how few people in defence in the UK have read The Kill Chain by Christian Brose. And I think if you're in the industry, you need to read it, because it sets out a future paradigm really for defence. And I think the second contextual piece was opportunity, and the second one is threat, which is that, and this has changed since we even wrote the white paper. You know, we now have peer adversaries, which we haven't had in the West for 20 years or so. We have adversaries with significant budgets, significant technological know-how, and significant desire to undermine, if you like, democracy and our way of being. And the point about hardware and software is that whilst all the battle platforms that we have, jets, tanks, ships, remain hugely important, we can't afford to out hardware infinitely all of our peer adversaries. So software being smarter, not just being bigger, and data has to play some kind of role in that. And what makes defence quite exciting from a data point of view at the moment is that there is actually now a burning platform for change, which there hasn't really been, quite understandably, for quite a long time. So that was kind of the context behind the white paper. And then the key themes we pulled out, so they probably won't surprise a lot of people on this call. Number one, I made this mistake. I called it procurement originally, but I changed my mind on that. I want to call it supply chain management or curation or something. It's about, you won't achieve something different with the same suppliers and the same commercial models that have always been in place. And this was a big lesson from digital transformation. When I was at the Cabinet Office, it's been lost in the sands of time, but when we did the original G-Cloud framework, it wasn't just about making procurement quicker or cheaper. It was about sitting back and thinking strategically to make this change. What sort of suppliers do we need? Are they different from our current suppliers? And if they are different, how do we make it such that they can contract with us? So that was a key point. The second point, again, I made a mistake originally. I called it technology, but I moved away from that and I changed it to product mindset versus project mindset. So gov.uk, you know, it's so easy to take that for granted. It's so easy to be a little bit cynical about it, etc. That was a massive world-leading change, which we still get the benefit from now. And one of the reasons for that change was it wasn't just run as a project, it was run as a platform that is constantly invested in, constantly budgeted for, constantly has talent that improves, iterates, etc. And as a result, it remains a very performant platform. But more widely than that, that project mindset of you do a business case, you get it signed off, you bring in contractors or suppliers, you set up a kind of temporary team. I mean, those temporary teams can go on for quite a few years, but anyway, they're fundamentally a temporary team. And once it's built, it's sometimes handed over somewhere to be looked after, but often at best, that's in a kind of maintenance way. The idea of a strategic platform, a product at the heart of your business that you constantly iterate and develop, is still lacking across most of the public sector. And that, with data, with what those strategies want to do with data, that will not work. That just will not work, because what you're trying to do with the data, the standards, the accuracy, the importance of what you're doing with the data won't wash unless it's properly looked after indefinitely. So I didn't talk about individual technologies. It was more about that mindset, basically. That was chapter 2. 3 was, if I rightly remember, about culture. And that was about, again, there's been some advance in this in the wider public sector on digital stuff. So we've got some new professions. We've got the DDAT framework. We've got some flexibility around pay to bring in certain new skills to the sector. This will all be needed with steroids for data. But actually, we still remain over-reliant on suppliers and what I call premium body shopping. We have a lack of deep technology skills within the public sector. So we've got lots of designers and user researchers and analysts and stuff, which is all important, but we lack that deep modern engineering permanent side skill set. We find we often lack product ownership. So who owns the product? Back to that product mindset. It's often a side of desk activity, or no one owns it, and they ask you as a supplier to own it, which you can't because you don't have the understanding of the business. That's a huge thing in terms of talent. There's a churn of senior leaders with experience in digital. This change we're talking about in defence, it's a generational change. It's going to take a decade at least for the sort of change we're talking about. The average tenure in, I think, senior civil service is about 2 years. So you're getting a loss of knowledge, a lot of churn, a lot of disruption and starting again when these things actually require quite a lot of tenacity and persistence. And then there was a lack of a strategic HR involvement, which is if we can't afford the right sorts of skill sets and people, what are we actually doing about our evaluation frameworks and those kinds of things? I will be quiet in a second. I'll come on to the last 2. The second to last one was about leadership, probably my biggest one. Actually, this so much has been achieved by those original digital leaders, but so often now executive leadership signs off a strategy, hires someone in to deliver it for them, and then behaves as if they don't have anything to do anything to enable that strategy in terms of governance or funding or unblocking or whatever. Again, in this context, in data, that will need to change. And I think you'll all be relieved that was pretty much the main points, the main themes from the paper. And apologies, I know they're not in some ways very data-y or very technical, but I was kind of trying to bring out all the stuff around the topic that kind of prevent it from happening rather than necessarily focus too much on the topic itself.
Lovely, James. Thanks so much. And as I said, the paper is a really good primer for context in all these matters, so thoroughly recommended. I'm going to move now to John Sheridan from the National Archives. John, it's lovely to see you again, and thanks for coming. The National Archives is not just a record keeper for the state. It really is at the heart of UK information policy. And to a large extent, it kind of sets the standards in data management across the UK and even across the world. I know the world listens when the National Archives speaks. Can you sum up the challenges you've seen in the past decade as we've moved to digital first, and give us your views on how the government can cope with exponential data growth and changes in ways of working and the opportunities presented with AI?
I'll do my best. It's a big topic. I mean, just a quick word first, picking up on something that James said about the kind of threat landscape the UK confronts, and your first hypothesis about the role that organisations like mine has to play in all of this. So I can give you a really powerful example of how we see ourselves as part of the nation's capability. When just under 2 years ago, the Russian tanks were approaching Kyiv, we were in touch with our Ukrainian colleagues about how we help safeguard their digital records. And in the space of 72 hours, we were able to set up a digital safe haven for 40 archives in Ukraine, for them to pass their material to us, effectively on a kind of permanent loan. So we have here at the National Archives, looked after by the British state, the contents of the Ukrainian digital archives. And I think it's an example of how in the kind of threat landscape that we're now in, this part of the 21st century, it's not quite so simple as the military go and fight the wars and the rest of us run the country at home. That institutions like mine have a real role as part of the nation's capability. To John's second question, which is about I've been a civil servant for 20 years now, and thinking about the last 10 years, so 2014 to 24, in some ways, from a data management perspective, it's depressingly like 2004 to 2014. You know, I've been talking about data standards and interoperability and semantic interoperability, gateways for data sharing, and we've made progress in relation to all of those things. What I think is really interesting is that it is absolutely plain to everyone that the next 10 years doesn't look like that, or even close to that. Now, I can give one example in practice where we've made some real headway with data standards and interoperability. So we run the publishing platform for the nation's laws. We found legislation.gov.uk. We found ourselves building and developing as a shared service the drafting tool for bills and managing amendments to bills through Parliament. We found ourselves receiving judgments from across the senior courts into the archive and publishing judgments. We have standardized all of the primary sources of law in this country around a single common standard. Now, we've suddenly got to a really interesting place because laws are really important to decision makers. Decision making is starting to get increasingly automated. We're in the era of automated intelligence. So how do we move our data offer as the source of the nation's laws to a place where the data that we're providing is designed not just for consumption by people, but consumption by automated decision-making systems readily and easily and in a commoditized way. And that's very much that's current work for us. How do we go about doing that? What do we need to change? But had it not been for the previous 10 years work of getting to the point where at least we have all of the nation's primary sources of law into the same format and in a single source, well, it would be, an artificial, it wouldn't be a meaningful question to ask and answer. So there's solving some of the old problems still makes sense, but we've got a whole bunch of new opportunities. Now, my academic background a long time ago, although I work in an archive, is in maths. I can offer you one reflection. That's like the mathematicians have had a secret for a long time that the world is in the process of discovering. And that is, if you can get your problem in maths from whatever discipline in maths into linear algebra, so vectors and matrices, then there's a whole bunch of amazing tools to solving that problem. And what we're seeing at the moment is the consequence of that basic strategy, right? Get your problem, whatever it is, into the world of linear algebra, and then we can throw all of the wonderful capabilities we have for working with vectors and matrices and tensors, and the fantastic computing power that's now available thanks to not least GPUs. This really opens up all sorts of extraordinary possibilities, and that is really game-changing for us all, and we're very excited about it, not least because we are sat with a load of text, and a lot of the stuff that you can do is now with text, so it's a real big game changer for us. But at root bottom, the AI revolution, if you're in my shoes, just looks like people discovering this secret that the mathematicians were kept quietly to themselves, like just get your problem into the world of linear algebra and magic happens, and so it is proving. But that's probably enough from me.
We could go, well, we could carry on. It's a fascinating topic. Thank you, John. I'm going to pin you down on a couple of those points as well afterwards. I'm now going to move to Veronica Bowman from DSTL. Ronnie, thanks so much for taking the time to be with us here today from our academic partner, DSTL. DSTL is kind of a nucleus of scientific effort within defence and has many key important strategic responsibilities for the UK. Today, though, the agency, like many others in government, must modernise to exploit best practice in data management and adapt to opportunities in AI that John's just been talking about. Can you talk to us about how you balance your ongoing commitments for DSTL and the state with the inherent expectations from the strategy that you improve as well on the ground?
So I'd love to be able to answer that question and say it was all solved and done. I'm not sure I can. What I can tell you is that I absolutely hear all of the points of the last two people and kind of am currently living them. So while I don't have a solution, I do have kind of thoughts on how we are moving forward. The first thing is, as you say, DSTL has a wealth of incredible scientists. And I think the key here is recognising for us that there is a disconnect between delivering cutting edge science and technology and what's always been seen before in government as business as usual tools of the trade. So business as usual tools of the trade along a vast number of kind of the business services are sort of seen as the laptop that you use, kind of a Microsoft type offering. Other offerings are available, but you know, the Word, the internet, the email, the kind of the spreadsheets, and maybe a little bit of compute, but not particularly much. And now we're kind of getting to the point where business as usual is an awful lot of compute. It is a massive amount of software infrastructure. There is a massive amount of assurance, data governance, storage required. And now we're getting to the point that we need to open up to, you know, large language models, AI. The pace of change is ever increasing. So those business as usual tools are actually what S&T is used to playing with as cutting edge. And moving from cutting edge to business as usual isn't an easy process because our kind of contracting mechanisms, our way of providing service, doesn't necessarily reflect that cutting edge change. And it's not kind of, it is obvious. A lot of people are like, well, it's obvious. It is obvious, but what's not obvious is the drive. If you sit at the kind of heart of an organization delivering business as usual, you don't see necessarily the need. So Excel's always worked. Why would I not keep all of my data in Excel, for instance? Well, it does work. The answer to that is it does work. It will work. It doesn't work particularly well. And I kind of recognise, John, I'm a mathematician by trade as well. And every time I get a nice Excel spreadsheet that I have columns that add up to more than 100%, I'm sat there kind of with my head in my hands, slightly weeping. Yes, they work, not particularly well, but they do work. The next stage, however, there's lots of hidden pitfalls in that I don't think we yet have really articulated in a way that enables a process. So what are some of those pitfalls? Some of those pitfalls are, well, what is the actual tangible benefit of going from a spreadsheet that someone types into into a real-time data system where the data is automated. I can't articulate that until I've got a real-time data storage situation, right? Which is going to cost an awful lot of money, and it's working right now. So while I do think there is a burning bridge, it's not necessarily a burning platform that everyone sees. There's also a whole load of great visualization tools, and as a statistician, I've been all over how do we make things understandable. Our issue is, as a statistician, I've always known that while it's great to make data kind of visually appealing and make it understandable, garbage in, garbage out. If your data set is not clean, if it is not up to date, then I can do a really snazzy picture, but it's not telling you the right thing. The trouble is the person looking at the picture doesn't know that. There is a big gap between clean, held data that is properly understood and the output. And that little nugget of kind of problem or valley is made worse by, I think, the kind of emergence of LLMs, because, well, I can't just stick stuff in and great stuff comes out. And you're like, well, yes. But you need to check that stuff coming out. It's not as simple as just getting something out of a large language model, because you don't actually know what that large language model is doing. And we've seen kind of anecdotal problems with law cases without references, and they are improving, but it's moving again away from, yes, it's great that you've got all these visualization tools and you feel like you're managing things, but what you have to actually assure is that underpinning data that's really difficult. And then the next piece is, a lot of these tools, data in particular, but that I work with, for instance, things like digital twins, have been sold as the panacea. They will save you time. They will save you money. They will improve your business. And the answer to that is, well, yes, they will, but they're going to cost you first. And they're going to cost you a lot. They're going to cost you in terms of money, like real hard cash up front, please, without any kind of justification. They're going to cost you in terms of organizational change. I need different people doing different things with different skill sets. I have to hire, change my way of working. I need to think about cost models. So a lot of government organizations will kind of get paid for the work that they do, and then a proportion gets hived off and pays for business as usual services. If business as usual services includes an LLM, data storage and compute, by the way, that percentage logically needs to go up, right? Because there's a lot more digital requirement per head. That needs to be recognized. We need to work out how to do that. So for me, yes, there is a burning platform. Yes, we definitely have the tools in terms of DSTL to do it, to move forward, but it's not about necessarily data and digital transformation. It's about getting at the blockers one by one and figuring the path through them. And those blockers aren't data and digital. I could, I think all of us probably on this call could come up with a system that works tomorrow. It might not be great, but we could do it. Done, figured it out, sorted. Implementing that, embedding that, holding that, because it's iterative. It's not about buying a thing that will work for the next 2 years or 10 years. It's not about buying a laptop. You can ignore it now pretty much for 6 years. It's about ongoing service. It's about continued cost in the cloud. It's about expanding and contracting requirements. It's such a massive business change that it does cause issues. Having said that, our approach, kind of going a bit to answering that question, is that we've effectively started to move scientists like me into that central business to help guide and shape and look at that from the science and figure out where some of those things. So I think it's all about partnership and working together.
Thank you so much, Ronnie. And I can see George nodding along here because he's going to address some of those points, I can guarantee it. So George represents another critical piece of MOD, which is the RAF. George, thanks so much for being here with us. It's always great to hear you talk on this subject, which you're so passionate about. The RAF is globally respected for its warfighting abilities, also its hardware, its strategic expertise, this is taken as read. But what are the data management challenges you face, and kind of where are you seeing improvements that will help sustain the RAF's position, the UK's position in air-based defence initiatives around the world?
Yeah, so as I've been listening to some of the other very esteemed people talking, and I'm going to try and be as eloquent as they have been. So one of the things, so lots of great data tech, and actually even in the military world, and a growing amount of data tech that are specific for military purpose. However, I actually think we're in a slightly different position in the Air Force, and I'm borrowing this from Carnegie Mellon, who gave a talk at DSTL's AI Fest probably 2 years ago now, which is most of the business world and most of the data tech gets to rely on the fact that it's operating from amazing bandwidth networks with access to huge cloud capabilities and enormous amounts of processing power. And the military is not in that same luxurious situation. We are not the only business in the whole world that operates like that. You can point to things like energy, where you have field agents too, but we do have our own set of unique challenges, and so we can't just innovate at the algorithm. We have to innovate at the computer, at the network, at the decision-making philosophy, because I think we're finding ourselves moving to a world where we're changing from this position where we'd go, we've done some, the intelligence community have done some analysis, here's the answer, here's the threat, no questions asked. And if the more we use AI, the more we use data with variable quality, the more we get into a position where we have to be saying, look, here's an answer, and I'm giving it to you with 70% confidence. So, and we're putting more onus back onto the user then to make a decision, or we're going to challenge our legal frameworks for operating, because we're saying, okay, what's the confidence threshold that we'll accept before we, decide to take action? And so I think there are lots of great things out there. Clearly, the military capabilities we're buying and building now with the likes of GCAP and the F-35 and some of the newer platforms that are coming into service are highly digital capabilities. But there's lots of work to do as well. I think one of the ways we're addressing some of the bigger challenges that we see, especially around the data management aspects, are trying to start from that place of where do we want to be, trying to use exploitation to drive the longer tail of governance. I'll give you a great example of this. So because like everyone else has spoken about, making the case for bigger data management, bigger data governance, which is absolutely a thing that this community will recognize as essential. But making that case is hard when there's so much other things that money needs to be spent on, and so many other opportunities to make progress. So the question for us is, how do we use the things that we're doing to drive the longer tail of management, rather than start with management and go, okay, we're ready to manage data now. What do you want to do after 5 years? An example of that is we've been doing some analysis at the moment around fleet management for a particular type of equipment. And using that to move it, where's it best placed in the Air Force? Where can we best use it? Who most needs this asset? What are they supposed to have? What do they currently have? Of what they're supposed to have, is it working? So yeah, and clearly data is a huge game changer in that situation. And now the teams are starting to realize that they better input their information correctly into the system. They're going, oh, you're making decisions about what I can have based on this information. Okay, I'll make sure it's up to date, and we will take ownership and responsibility. And that's a great opportunity for us to go, all right, well, here's a framework that Defence has created. to help you manage that responsibility. Here's the tools that will help you manage that data appropriately. We're going to spend some time listening to you to understand the context in which you use this information and make sure that our interpretation of trained is the same thing that you mean. So I don't take someone out of phase 1 and try and put them on a highly complex mission because I've seen the word trained in the data set. And so using for us, using the exploitation as the means to drive through the longer tail of management has been a key pivot in terms of getting buy-in and support for the kinds of things that we want to do.
Thank you so much, George. So I guess a question that has been addressed by all of you is the decision making, and maybe it's not a data problem, it's a management problem, or it's a procurement problem. To what extent do we feel that the management here, the senior civil service, the senior leaders in the military are up for the challenge, that they understand the importance of these changing business models, that they have got to grips with the subject matter, and what help do they need from the rest of us if that hasn't been sorted yet? I'll put that to you, George, as you were sort of on the subject matter.
Sure, yeah. And clearly the answer to that is it varies, but a moment that sticks in my mind is the team coming back from a meeting at the Exco saying the chief has asked us if we're going to make use of this data, what the hell we're doing about data governance. And it was a real like dance around the desk moment of like, finally, you know, we've tipped a point where the senior leadership understand and are asking for the right things. We're not just getting the like, can we do some more AI, please? We're getting the, I think data governance here is really important, and setting the accountabilities is, and it opens the door for the conversation around how do we actually make that happen in the Air Force. So I would say still a variable picture, but a changing tide on recognition that you can't have AI without data. You can't have data well unless you treat it and manage it properly. And I would say that is a positive picture from our perspective.
That's good to hear. John, you must have met everybody who has a responsibility for data in your time, last 20 years. How are trends looking from your perspective?
It's a difficult question. Particularly this point about how do you govern this context that we're moving into, I would start by underscoring, like, let's not forget how bad human decision making is, how noisy human decision making is, and how poorly evidenced many times human decision making is, and let's therefore not underestimate in the medium to longer term the opportunity for significantly improving decision making that is on the table. Potentially. On data governance, we've been thinking about this really carefully because the organization worries about its reputation, and we want to make sure that we are trusted to hold the nation's digital memories. And we know that we don't have a clear view about what the public expectation is about what kind of computational analysis happens to the data that's held by the nation's digital archive. The thing I'm most concerned about is that we are too quick to establish governance that ossifies too fast. We've been trying to have an agile approach to our data governance around our adoption and use of AI, simply because it's like we don't know how to govern this properly yet. So what we're going to need to do is set up some, we're going to run some experiments. We're going to try and govern this as an experiment and see what we learn. But we're mindful that governance processes have this property of ossifying really fast, and we could set all of the parameters in the wrong place in terms of the balance of risk and opportunity, harm and benefit. So we're having a go. Now, I don't know how long we'll be able to pull this off for, right? Of like, we're going to do a reasonably agile approach to developing our understanding of how we need to govern our data in the context of a whole bunch of new opportunities that are ahead of us. I don't know how long we can like hold that. And this is in the context of we're a small organization, right? So there's only what 560 of us, and if you're in my shoes, it's relatively easy to get a decision, right? So even in that context, it's relatively easy to get a decision in a small organization. It's like we're going to try and hold the line for a bit. Now, what happens when, as inevitably will happen, something goes wrong? Well, we'll see. But meanwhile, we're going to try and give ourselves some space to do some experimentation by holding back on going too far too fast. No governance, but
so that's a really important point, John. You are in a smaller organization. So Ronnie, you are in a bigger organization under broader constraints. To what extent do you have a runway for experimentation of the type John has just described? How can you try a new thing without going through all the procurement hoops, all the governance hoops that James was describing at the beginning of this conversation?
So because we're lucky enough to be an S&T organisation, actually that trialling is easier than you might think. We've got AI specialists, we've got data specialists, we've got mathematicians. That trialling is the easy bit. We kind of can do the cutting edge. Like if someone came to us and said, tell us how to do this, then I think we do a really good job of doing that. The difficulty is, as you say, we are a bigger organisation, and you do need kind of, you need to transition that to do unto yourself. We can fix it for other people. Can we fix it for ourselves? And we are trying, but it's not easy. And I think there's also a kind of we're in a weird transition, I think. So you said, do the senior leaders get it? And from what I've seen, actually, the senior leaders really do get it. They do get it. They're working in a very constrained financial environment at the moment. They don't necessarily have the kind of the gift to just go throw money at it. Where I think we get into issues is that there's a big piece in the middle. It's the middle managers, the ones doing the commercial frameworks, the ones that have been filling in the spreadsheets. And it's very difficult as a kind of a data person. I'm like, well, I can write a brief code to do that. I can do this, I can do that. Other people don't have that base capability. So I think it's about allowing some time maybe for that impetus. No, you must learn. It's not that hard. And actually the onus, particularly on us as data experts, to go, I know it looks hard, I know it looks scary. Let me help. Let me make those data pipelines really easy. So governance is a really key one. You can put every governance structure in place that you like, right? And we've all, I'm sure, seen those good ones that say, oh, well, make sure when you're saving a document you put the date on it, because that's the good assurance governance thing, you know when it was done. And we're going to, for some reason, put the date in backwards, right? Now, I don't know about anyone else, but that's my first blocker, right? I have to really think about how I put my data in backwards. I still don't know why. Computers, however, are massively good at that. You tell them this is the format I want the data in, and they go, okay, they go. It's about us to understand, how do I make it easy? How do I make this governance as easy as possible? How do I automate as much of it as possible? So I don't think it's about necessarily experimentation. What it is about exactly what we've seen in the rest of science. It's about teams of multidisciplined people coming together to solve a problem, not just us data people, but the people that understand UI, UX, the people that understand how people think, the psychologists, the sociologists, the people that understand organizational change, and can go, this is how you make it easy for people. This is how you bring people with you. This is how you understand where the bottlenecks are, where the difficulties are. This is how you actually make it inclusive so that we can do this. And I think it's not answered your question. I think we can do that experimentation. What the next step is about taking it from experimentation that a scientist are all comfortable with and putting it in the everyday.
Got it. I'm going to segue to a point James has made in the chat, which is really about military things. So let's say Ronnie and George have a think about this. The national strategies that I mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, to what extent are they realistic enough? Are they timed correctly? Are they understood on the ground? Do tactics meet strategy at the moment? And if those strategies aren't being regularly used and they aren't being pinned to the work on the ground, what function do they serve? And perhaps should they be clipped to be a bit more realistic?
Do you want me to take it first? I've done some thinking about it and I'll give George some time to think. So I think they are being used. I think they're incredibly useful. And I think what they serve to be is just what they say on the tin. They are a vision and a strategy. Now we need the next step, which is the roadmap, right? That's my strategy. That's where I want to be and how I want to get there in really broad brushstrokes. That needs to come first. It must come first, because otherwise you don't know where we're going. But now it's kind of comes to the next level down. And that's the piece that I'm currently working on here is, well, I could write another strategy, but what I actually need to understand are the steps that I need to take to go towards that strategy. So I think they are what we need. They're incredibly timely. They're written really well. They're understandable. We know where we're going. There is another step, and that's now what we need, I think.
Yeah, I would absolutely echo that as well. And actually, the Chief Digital and Data Office inside the CAB office are doing some really good work brokering that conversation as well. So a good example of that is the data maturity assessment that was published, and all of government has done this data maturity assessment, and it came to us, and we fed back into the MOD's overall response to the data maturity assessment. Now, that's really interesting because it captures the themes of the national data strategy, or at least part of the national data strategy, in the maturity assessment. So you get to evaluate yourself against the framework of the strategy. And then, but it is down to the individual organizations then, I think, to turn their maturity or lack of into a plan for how they overcome and improve. And so we never needed the national data strategy to be specific and tactically implementable, because it could never have done that for the entirety of government. We needed it to be the guiding light to help us plan our own journeys, and then we needed some support facilitating that, which we've absolutely had from the Cabinet Office.
Thank you. So it's 10 to 1 now. I daren't take on another existential question here, because I think we'd run into the time barrier. But let's just pick up a question from James at the beginning, which was about how to motivate and keep talent in data management and beyond. We often hear that there's a risk that IP goes out the door to the suppliers. James has talked about premium body shopping. How do we avoid that? How do we make sure that the civil servants retain the expertise and hold on to it and make a career out of it, rather than hiring consultancy A, B, C, D who will keep the IP and then jog off when the work is done? What are our levers?
I think if I can just jump in, but I'll relate it a bit back to the digital transformation thing. So I think the first thing to say, the reason I was interested in Ronnie's point, which was really well made, as I said, is that this is much harder than digital transformation. That came out very strongly in the white paper, is you can redesign an online informational or transactional service over here and almost leave the rest of the organization untouched. If we're going to make the most of data, you can't do that. It's a team sport. Everyone's got to be involved. And in that case, your sort of people framework becomes critical. So I'm still using those lessons, though. I wasn't aware in the early digital kind of strategies and transformations of the HR profession either being asked to be involved or taking a leading role themselves. To be, I was a civil servant and myself, was a bit disappointing, really. Like, there wasn't much to be said by quite senior HR directors about what this meant for workforce planning, for terms and conditions, for time. And I won't go on about this, but I met a guy when I was doing the white paper who has been in a very pioneering part of the army, doing some really interesting stuff with data in all sorts of places in the world, paid for the army, by the army, to do an MSc in computer and data science. This, I mean, wow, great leader, major, everything else. And he was leaving the day after I met him because he'd been told, you won't advance your career here based on that background. You need to go into a general staff position. Now, I'm not saying that's an entirely bad thing, but the point being, a fundamental look at structures, people models, incentives, the type of people you want to hire, all that kind of stuff. Very easy to say, very difficult to do, but I think that has to be done in order to deliver these strategies. And if you were sort of going to pick one thing to make it work, that would be my one from the white paper. You're on mute, John.
I knew that would happen. John, you've always had a healthy and partner-led approach to working with suppliers. You know where the expertise lies, and you use that expertise as appropriately as you can. Have you kept enough talent within the National Archives to be able to sustain the IP, to be able to set direction without washing it out the door?
Just about. So that example I gave at the beginning of setting up the digital safe haven, we did that in-house. We were only able to respond that fast because we had the in-house know-how. We weren't working through a contract or a procurement or a supplier, so we had the capability, we had the capacity. We have the problems that James is talking about in terms of some of the underlying things. On like, what can you do about it? Well, I combat those problems with really strong purpose, growing our own talent, and being super stubborn, like just not giving up, because, you know, at no point anytime soon are we going to win a pay freedom case, or are we going to like break the organization's pay structure, or I'm not going to put like frankly, I'd be tilting at windmills to try. So it's like, okay, well, try at the moment. You have to pick your moment sometimes. So that's not a battle that's worth me taking on just now. But purpose, grow my own talent, and just bloody mindedness works. You know, you can get somewhere. It's I'm saying it's easy, but you can get somewhere.
John, John, sorry, don't worry, I won't go on, but just one point on that. I totally agree with John. Some of that stuff is just an unachievable battle. But I think in defence, that's why I start, in my view, with the level of the stakes that we're at. That's a battle that actually I think has to be had and has to be won, because the stakes are too high at the moment on this. That's just my slightly personal view, but I totally take the point.
Yes, I agree, and I think, George, perhaps you can give your views here. In the military, unlike in Silicon Valley, seniority is still a function of time served. So you are only at the very top once you are at a certain age, almost without exception. Yet we are seeing improvements in the military in terms of rewarding senior data talent and making sure that the very top layer of management has access to those skills.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. It's a real philosophical debate, especially in the MOD right now, around the purpose that the civil service and the military serve. And is that purpose to build tech, or are we going to accept that we are going to outsource that? So that's just a choice that needs to be made. And I would say that where we win is that almost everyone in the MOD is very purpose driven. So I think one of the best things we can do is A, accept that technologists leave, like at some stage. B, make sure we give them access to good problems, enable them to do their jobs, and keep them motivated through purpose. Because, you know, if someone's getting a dodgy deal on pay versus what they could get in the private sector, like, the worst thing that you can do is then make it impossible for them to do their job, because you won't give them access to the data or won't give them access to the tech. And so I think we need to acknowledge that lots of people don't join the military or the civil service because they think it's going to be the best paid. They join because they want to make a difference, and we must enable our technologists to make a difference. And thankfully, there's lots of difference to be made.
Well, look, that's a lovely point at which we can stop, because it's lunchtime and that is us done. So again, thanks so much to the panel for your expert views. It's been really great